On February 22, 1946, in a small village called Texarkana, located in Texas, USA, a young man named Jimmy Hollis, 25, and a girl named Mary Jean, 19, were out on a date to watch a movie at the cinema. After the movie, they got into Jimmy's car and were heading back to Mary's house. They pulled over to a quiet spot on the side of the road to chat for a bit. Just 10 minutes later, a strange man wearing a white mask shone a flashlight at them and pointed a gun at them. The man was standing on Jimmy's side of the car and calmly said, "I don't want to kill you, my friend. So do exactly what I say without arguing." Jimmy and Mary stepped out of the car. The masked man forced Jimmy to take off his pants. Then he hit Jimmy twice on the head so hard that it fractured his skull, knocking him unconscious. After that, he tried to assault Mary and steal her purse. Mary begged him to leave them alone, telling him they didn't have any money. But the attacker hit her and knocked her to the ground. When she got back up, he told her, "Run." Mary did as he said and started running, but she wasn't fast enough because she was wearing high heels. The man chased her down, hit her again, and knocked her to the ground. At this point, Jimmy regained consciousness and managed to flag down a passing car. The car stopped, and the attacker ran away as soon as he saw its headlights. Jimmy and Mary were taken to the hospital for treatment. They stayed there for more than 12 days because Jimmy's skull fracture was severe. Today, we're going to talk about the first unsolved murder case in Texas history. The Phantom Killer case of the mid-1940s. Texarkana was known to be a rough place. Murders, thefts, and other crimes were pretty common there. That's why the attack on Jimmy and Mary didn't really shock the police. Even the townsfolk didn't pay much attention when they heard about it. But everything changed a month later when a new attack happened, one that ended in murder. On the morning of March 24th, the police found two bodies. The first was Richard L. Griffin, a 29-year-old man. The second was Polly N., a 17-year-old girl. They were found murdered in an Oldsmobile car on a street known as Lover's Lane. Richard was shot in the back of the head while kneeling between the car's front seats. His pockets had been turned inside out, suggesting a robbery. Polly was found lying on the back seat. The only thing the police could confirm was that both had been shot with a .32 caliber Colt pistol. There were supposedly footprints left by the killer at the crime scene since the ground was dirt, but unfortunately, a heavy rainstorm that day had wiped all traces away. With no solid evidence to work with, the police had to question as many people as possible. They interrogated over 50 people, but their efforts led nowhere. It seemed like the police were just trying to cover their bases and show the public they were doing their job. At the time, most people thought this crime was unrelated to the attack on Jimmy and Mary a month earlier. The assumption was that these incidents were separate and nothing to worry about. But 3 weeks later, something happened that turned everyone's indifference into fear and panic. On April 14th, the police found two more bodies. The victims were Betty Booker, 15 years old, and Paul Martin, 16 years old. The night before their deaths, the pair had attended a party, seen by several people before leaving around 1:30 a.m. Paul's body was discovered on the road, shot 4 times in the head. Betty's body was found a kilometer away, deep in the woods, shot twice. The police immediately noticed something chilling. The same .32 caliber Colt pistol was used in this murder, the same weapon that killed Richard and Polly. This was now the third attack on a couple, young lovers or partners, within 2 months. With 4 victims now dead, the townsfolk of Texarkana finally realized that the attacks were connected and that something big was happening. The fear became so intense that when husbands or fathers went to work, wives and children would leave their homes to stay in a local hotel called the Grimm Hotel, waiting there until their loved ones returned. For those who didn't flee to the hotel, they armed themselves with weapons, added locks and barbed wire around their homes, and braced for an attack. The streets became empty, and fear was visible on everyone's faces. A local newspaper, the Texarkana Gazette, dubbed the attacker the Phantom Killer. Detective Tillman Johnson, one of the lead investigators, reported that the police were overwhelmed with an avalanche of phone calls. Most calls came at night. If someone saw an unfamiliar person walking nearby or heard a strange sound, they would immediately call the police. People were terrified, and everyone feared they'd be the phantom killer's next victim. On May 3rd, a farmer named Virgil Starks, 37 years old, was at home listening to the radio when suddenly a .22 caliber bullet broke through the window and hit him. His wife, Katie, came out of their bedroom after hearing the noise. She saw Virgil bleeding and rushed to leave the house, but the attacker fired 2 bullets at her, hitting her in the face. The bullets shattered part of her teeth, but despite her injuries, she didn't die. Katie managed to lock herself in a room, and as the attacker tried to break into the house, she escaped through the kitchen window. Imagine this. She ran while still carrying a bullet lodged beneath her tongue. Somehow, she reached a nearby farm where the neighbors took her to the hospital. Katie survived, but Virgil succumbed to his injuries. Due to the fear and terror caused by the phantom killer among the villagers, over 30 police officers went to the crime scene to collect evidence and take statements from the people living there. Detective Johnson recalled how the townsfolk were so terrified that they would stand behind their doors yelling, "Identify yourself before you come any closer, or we'll shoot." The police discovered bloody footprints near the scene and tried to follow them, but the trail disappeared when it reached the main road. This latest attack pushed the town's panic to an even higher level. Everyone was on edge. But this case brought confusion. Was this attack also the work of the phantom killer, or was it someone else? Here's why people were unsure. The previous victims were all young couples, and the attacks took place in their cars. This time, Virgil and Katie were older and attacked at home. Virgil was shot with a .22 caliber pistol, while the earlier victims were killed with a .32 caliber Colt. Despite these differences, the police linked the attack to the phantom killer cases. They intensified their efforts to catch him. In fact, police officers dressed in plain clothes and partnered with women to pose as couples, hoping to lure the killer into attacking them. But 2 months passed with no new crimes, and the phantom killer vanished without a trace. As time went by, people's fear began to ease, and life in Texarkana slowly returned to normal. After the wave of attacks by the phantom killer, the police narrowed down their suspects to 2 individuals they believed could be responsible. Suspect number 1, H.B. Duty. Duty was a college student who became a suspect after his died. He left behind a note that said, "You want to know why I killed myself? Believe me, if any one of you committed 2 double murders, you'd end it this way too. Yes, I'm the one who killed Betty and Martin that night, and I also killed Virgil and tried to kill his wife." Duty's cousin, a psychiatrist named Dr. John Tennyson, supported the idea that Duty could be the phantom killer, citing several connections between him and the victims. Duty worked at the cinema where many of the victims had watched movies before their deaths. He attended the same school as Betty, one of the victims. He had mutual acquaintances with Katie, Virgil's wife. However, the police couldn't definitively prove he was the killer. The suicide note raised doubts. Duty had a history of mental health issues, and investigators thought he might have falsely claimed responsibility for the murders to add drama to his death. A criminal like the phantom killer, they reasoned, would likely avoid confessing at all. The second suspect was Lee Sweeney, 29 years old. A major clue linked him to the murders. A soldier in Arkansas, Max Tackett, noticed a pattern. Every time there was an attack by the phantom killer, a stolen car was reported around the same time. The stolen cars were later found abandoned in remote areas. On June 28, one of these abandoned cars led the police to a garage in the middle of town. Through this investigation, they found Peggy Sweeney, Lee's 21-year-old wife. When questioned, Peggy dropped a bombshell. She told the police her husband was the phantom killer. According to her, the night before the Betty and Martin murders, April 14, the couple had stopped their car to drink a beer when Lee told her, "I need to go take care of something," meaning to urinate. He was gone for a full hour. While he was gone, Peggy heard gunshots. When Lee returned to the car, he seemed rushed and nervous. This confession made Lee a prime suspect, but Peggy later gave a second version of the same story. In her revised account, she said Lee told her they were going to rob someone. They came across a parked car with Martin and Betty inside. Lee asked Peggy to search the victims, but she refused. He became furious and shot Martin twice. Then, he dragged Betty into the woods, shot her, and returned to the car saying, "I wanted to have some fun with the girl before I killed her." The conflicting stories made it hard for police to trust Peggy. Why the police still considered Lee Sweeney a suspect. Despite the inconsistencies in Peggy's accounts, she provided details about the crime scene that were not public knowledge. For example, Peggy mentioned that Lee threw Martin's book into the woods before killing him. This was a fact known only to Detective Presley, who had personally found the book in the exact spot she described. These revelations kept Lee under suspicion. But without solid proof, the case against him couldn't move forward. The mystery of the Phantom Killer remained unsolved. The police needed to locate Lee Sweeney and question him about the murders, but he had left the state. Eventually, he returned from Atlanta, Georgia, where he had been trying to sell a stolen car. The authorities apprehended him, and during interrogation, they accused him of being the Phantom Killer. Lee denied everything and refused to cooperate. The use of truth serum. To get a confession, the police decided to use a truth serum, a chemical substance that was believed to compel people to speak honestly, almost unconsciously. However, things went horribly wrong. The dose given to Lee was excessive, causing him to fall into a coma. Detective Johnson, the lead investigator, later said, "We should have kept him here for questioning. Maybe we could have gotten something useful out of him, but we sent him for the truth serum, and now he's beyond our reach." Lee remained in the custody of authorities in another state, leaving the Texarkana police with no jurisdiction over him anymore. The verdicts. Despite the gravity of the crimes, the legal outcomes were surprising. Peggy Sweeney, who had confessed to aiding her husband and provided key details, was sentenced only to a short prison term for her involvement in car thefts. She was released after a brief time in custody. Lee Sweeney was convicted, not for the murders, but for being a habitual car thief. He was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, in 1973, the Texas Supreme Court reviewed his case and decided the punishment was excessive, considering the crimes were related to vehicle theft, not murder. He was released from prison. Lee lived for 21 more years after his release, passing away in a nursing home in 1994, never formally convicted of the Phantom Killer murders. Legacy of the Phantom Killer. The Texarkana Gazette later published a reflection on the events, stating, "Though the Phantom Killer's crimes struck fear and terror into the hearts of the people, they also brought the community closer together in a way nothing else could. The shared fear led to greater unity and significantly reduced overall crime rates in the area. The true identity of the Phantom Killer remains a mystery, and the case remains one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in American history." This concludes the story of the Phantom Killer. I hope you enjoyed it.